Hey there, I just got out of the hospital. Let's talk music. I hope your 2024 was good. Mine was a little bit rocky.
This is one of the most out-of-touch videos I have ever seen.
This is a dumb question.
I don't feel like finishing.
I'm horny on May.
But thankfully, my mental state has not really been too affected, save for the occasional impulse buy.
Oh my god, bro.
Oh, hell no, man.
Last year, I ranked 50 albums, and let me just get the obvious out of the way. I no longer stand by any of that video, pretty much. Even in that video, I said as much, trying to future-proof it, and yet I have still spent the entirety of 2024 trying to atone for those sins. So this video is probably not going to be quite as nuanced as the last one, if only because I basically just downloaded Album of the Year directly into my skull. These albums are scored in brackets of 5, no repeat artists, because there were 4 Radiohead albums last time, and that's insane. Oh, and props to post-rock as a genre. It's a fascinating genre, and I like it. It just didn't make the list. But that being said, let's beat these dollar store Fantano allegations and kick this year's ass.
Yeah, you tell it, man. Yeah.
No, we're not doing this.
Not doing what?
Hey, humor me. What's your name?
Hell.
Uh-huh, yeah, get out.
What do you mean?
Right now.
Fuck you, man. Dark Fantasy is a 10. Vulture's 1 isn't even that bad. The King of Limbs is super underrated.
Okay, as I was saying...
Hey! What's that on that beat? No.
Yeah, it's a tale as old as time. You're sitting in your room staring at the ceiling, wearing a light t-shirt and shorts, and maybe underwear. It's not super important. Your eyes are glazed over and you're aimlessly scrolling on YouTube when all of a sudden you see a song called Euphoria, dropped 20 minutes ago, and you thought, fuck it, why not? And then, for the next 3 days, the world proceeded to light on fire. The beef was my introduction to Kendrick, to hip-hop as a whole, really. He's just better at it than everybody else. After the fucking searing victory that Kendrick had in the Drake beef, to shadow drop an album is some of the most incredible and gratifying psychological warfare I've ever seen, ever. And yes, that includes movies and like self-insert fanfiction, not that I read that. It's a lot easier to hop in and hop out of than your average heady concept work. And what's more, it's done a lot better too. Mustard! I have neighbors, I can't shout too loud.
If you can't get what you want, then come with me.
Plastic Beach. Plastic Beach. One of the most varied albums I've heard in a long time, blending elements of trip hop and hip hop and synth pop and electro pop and pop squat. Editor, cut that out, that sucked. Damon Albarn's group of misfits create a surprisingly conceptual work that took multiple listens to really click for me, as it seems like it did for everybody. On the first few listens, I was kind of put off by the absurd amount of features, and how the tracks that are the most immediately obvious are the ones where 2B gets to sing on mic. But once it kind of dawned on me how in on the joke everybody was, save for the Little Dragon features, which... At this point, I can't deny that it's an incredible way to spend an hour. Even if I tend to revisit Demon Days more often, I feel like Plastic Beach is overall more consistent and a much richer experience too. Man, I have really fallen in love with shoegaze these past couple of weeks. And even though generally a shoegaze project tends to grow on me with time, this one has pretty much remained a constant powerhouse of chilled out druggy music. Souvlaki, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, is a dreamy, soupy, and almost reserved crop of tracks that still manage to each be iconic in their own right. A common compliment thrown at records is, this feels like getting high without drugs. But this album really... The first time I listened to this, I was walking home from class. I remember getting so lost in the middle of track 6 or 7, and by this point the feeling of just leaving your own brain into this cozy, cottony world was so immense. I had been walking in a straight line with my eyes closed and had inadvertently wandered into the street. So this album almost killed me, and so I'm not gonna lie, part of its inclusion on this list is because I'm worried it might strike again. I'm hoping it's like a vengeful god, and if I praise it enough, maybe it'll leave me alone. Oh boy, they're back. A Moon-Shaped Pool took quite a while to warm up on me. I thought it was their weakest album for a very long time, actually. It's because I was listening to it while I was trying to study. If you listen to it after a long day of work when you're like too tired to pass out, this is a shit. It's bookended by 2 tracks that really don't fit the vibe, but are good in their own right, of course. And then the middle tracks, 2 through 10, are like a relaxing plane ride with a window seat. It's just a pleasant time. It's not joyous by any stretch, this is radio ever talking about, but it's also not beating you over the head with sorrow like they do so often on other records. They save that for the end. The only thing about this album that I don't really love is the fact that there are whispers of a loungier sound that would eventually become The Smile. It's not the same thing, and I'm tired of being told that it is, because it's not. What are we talking about?
I want to love you like a pretty young thing. You need some loving.
Like I said, beating the discount Fantano allegations. Is it a singles collection? Absolutely. You wouldn't lose higher order concept by lancing a track or 2, that's for damn sure. I don't fucking care, man. This thing is so much fun. What this album has in spades is generation-defining pop songs. I'll say it, even the Paul McCartney track. Like, yes, it's very stupid. Paul, the most famously married musician on the planet maybe, was in his 40s fighting over a girl with Michael fucking Jackson. It's funny. Oh, it's cool if the Beastie Boys do it, but if it's Paul McCartney, meh. Fuck you, man. Live a little. I think the only moment where this album slows down at all is that absolute snoozer of a closer. I look forward to looking through more of the King of Pop's discography, even if he is a piece of shit. Side note, that movie, anybody else really scared about that? Because there's no way to do that right. We're beating the Fantano allegations! Marquee Moon is exactly what I wanted it to be. I'm pretty tough on punk music, and post-punk is basically the same thing, just with more plosives. And post-punk revival? Shit, dude. But I think atop all of it stands this album, with tongue-in-cheek lyrics, suave vocals, and the drummer reminds me a lot of Stuart Copeland, which makes me very fucking happy. In the sense that, like, he sucks. Like, he's good at drumming, but, like, he sucks at... It's the punk aesthetic. This is one of those albums where on every listen there's, like, one track that doesn't stick, but whichever track that is... changes album to album. I should cut that burp out. I understand why it's stuck around. It's fucking awesome. Also, this album cover is the first deep-fried meme, and I will die on that hill. Now, there's one television I won't change channels on. It would be so easy. It would be so easy.
Sitting on a sack of beans, sitting down in a New Orleans.
So one of 2 albums that's actually here. Blood Sugar Sex Magic is one of the only double albums I can think of that I don't think is a waste of time. That's a huge qualifier for me, in earnest. There are a lot of great albums where, objectively, I could sit there for an hour 30 and like every second of it, but I also am very impatient. And so for an album by the fucking Chili Peppers, no less, to keep me engaged for the entire runtime is actually kind of incredible. I went into that expecting to be bored out of my fucking mind, and instead I walked out a believer. And if it's not for you, that's totally fine. I completely get it. Like, it's stupid. And it starts out at a place where you're kind of like, alright, Vinc's on some weird shit, but it just keeps getting better. And the place it ends is so fucking dumb. But I don't know, man. Somehow all the grooves feel pretty distinct. And while a lot of the members of the Chili Peppers are not good people, at this point I've kind of just had to accept the fact that most people suck. I think this is the highest hip-hop record on the list, and of course it's the one that's fucking insane. Danny Brown is one of the most expressive people that has ever seen a microphone, and the only way I can possibly think to fully engage a persona like that is to put him over 15 of the most psychotic and deranged beats ever produced, and he still manages to keep up. He's the glue that binds these flaming trash bags of noise into spell-binding hip-hop. It's nothing short of masterful. A lot of the themes Danny touches on this record are extremely heavy, and they feel like they'd be more becoming of a record a lot more grounded than this one is. This album is about vigorously doing drugs, selling drugs, making drugs, regretting doing drugs. The sound of it becoming drugs. This might be too straight edge pilled, but it really reads to me like trying to envision justification for why they do this stuff to themselves. These habits that Danny fully admits on the record are self-destructive, because this album is very fun, and a lot of the ruminations lyrically seem to be in the direction of, something ain't adding up here, Chief. Something's wrong. Or maybe it's just that it sounds good. It's my favorite hip-hop album as of right now, so I mean, like, I tend to agree.
How can I deal with this? If you won't get with this, am I gonna heal from this?
I am surprised the world likes Fiona Apple. Not to say that she's bad, because she's not. She's here. Doesn't feel like something that would do well in Album of the Year. It feels like they hate anything that isn't trying to reinvent the wheel. And while Fiona's writing, it could be argued, does that, the grooves themselves are, I guess, just a more cozy version of the grandiose, arena-shaking pop music you hear on the radio today. Of course, the hit rate on this album as opposed to radio music is higher. I'm not trying to make an equivalency between the two. But I was expecting, like, Kate Bush from this, and what I got instead was like Shrek 2. I'm not doing a good job endearing you to this album. It's fantastic piano rock. Cool arrangements with electronic influences. There's some trip-hoppy bits. And despite the record having fantastic writing throughout, the more soulful cuts are where the writing really leaps out to take a chunk out of you. And hearing a singer-songwriter project that isn't mopey, subdued, or dark, or nothing like that. Fiona's just pissed off, and that is so refreshing. I actually used every single track on this album in the Apple tier list. I forget now why I did that.
I bet your pussy is holy too.
You were probably waiting for this to pay off. Yep, new sound is here, as it is on everybody's list, but fuck it, man, it's great. What can I say? I wouldn't call this a step down from Hellfire, more of a step sideways, but he recorded this in Brazil, and you can really tell. There's a lot of traditional Brazilian instrumentation on this thing. It turns it into Greep's most expansive contribution to the wider music scene, with and without Black MIDI. In isolation, these tracks are kind of hard to listen to, but if you listen to the whole project, weirdly enough, all of these harebrained manic episodes weave themselves into a beautiful little narrative. The album tells the story of an incel who falls in love with a prostitute, where the 12-minute track toward the end actually feels earned and a real wash of beauty. Side note, since Black MIDI broke up, they're offloading all of their inventory, and this hat was $4. So, suck my dick. Also, it glows in the dark. I'm recording this at 3 in the afternoon. It's still light outside. Man, I forgot I put this here. Hear me out. Don't touch your keyboard yet. I'm gonna have the conversation before you try to have it yourself in the comments. Hey Vinc, why is this fucking YouTuber music better than any hip-hop album ever made, ever? Could you explain it to me real quick? I'd just like to know, for a friend. The friend is God. You have to answer to God. In college, I listened to this album a lot of times with the Gun Away Please, and I think actually it's pretty solid pop punk music. I hadn't touched this thing since college, so like 3 years ago, and I finally decided to give it a re-listen while I was setting up Christmas decorations in my apartment because I figured this is the only occasion that re-listening to an album that I loved in college and will hate now won't ruin, and so now, shamefully, forever in my brain will exist a glorious happy memory of wrapping the Eevee that I bought for myself as a Christmas gift to myself in the shitty LED strip while Nate Wants to Battle yells about emotions that are as deep as a bowl of rice. And I don't know, man. No, you know what? Here we go. Support smaller artists. And there you go. Now if you say a single bad thing about the album, you're a capitalist pig. You should be ashamed of yourself. Another band that I listened to a lot in college, perhaps this one is a bit less shameful than the previous, and even though their big ticket albums are Hemispheres and this one, A Farewell to Kings is no contest the best one, at least that I've revisited since college. Madrigal is one of the most beautiful love songs ever written. Xanadu is one of the most engaging tracks that's over 10 minutes ever written. Closer to the Heart is one of the best pop songs ever written, and the other three are great songs in their own right. It's a real tour de force, and I can't believe it's not spoken of in the same breath as their greatest work. It's exactly what you expect it's gonna be. Fun 70s prog with virtuosic performances, big sci-fi concepts of faraway lands and royalty and space, coinciding with the release of something else that same year I can't quite remember the name of, and vocals that are assuredly an acquired taste, but eventually become inexorably tied to the overall sound of the band. The only thing about it that I'll say is just produce Peart's drums right one time, and then you have an all-time favorite band. Also, fun fact about this album, the last track is Cygnus X1. The song ends with the members of this space crew falling into a black hole. And the next album, Hemispheres, the opening track is Cygnus Part 2, which is pretty fucking cool.
Won't you stay with me, my darling?
And rounding out the 90s is this delightful little pop folk album. Now, if you'll recall, Curses off this album won our greatest songs of all time bracket, and so I thought I'd pay my respects to the album as a whole and give it a full listen, and I was not disappointed. I think the lead singer of this band, whose name I believe is Emily with 7 E's, is maybe the greatest singer. And so there are some tracks where you're like, oh, the voice. Other tracks where you're like, oh, the arrangement. And there are still other tracks where you're like, oh, the writing. Besides the instrumental palette being very different from the average radio rock album that I tend to listen to, the pop sentiment keeps this thing breathing, alive, bright, and fun. Except for the one track that makes me want to crawl in a hole and cry. But other than that, yeah, great. Plus, it's gay. Moving into the 95s now, these are albums where I like every track, but there's missing that little X factor that pulls them into perfection status. This album reminds me of going to child therapy with my dad. 4-year-old me could not get enough Nine Inch Nails. The Downward Spiral is in many ways famous as it is infamous, and while the lyrics can read as kind of juvenile, and its legacy is forever tied to the Columbine massacre of all things, it makes up for it by having one of the most engaging concepts and mind-blowing production I've ever heard on anything. Plus, this album feels like it wants you dead. While it might be easy to write this band off as mindless anger, flailing, and sexualization, and while the sound of course blew me away because I just tend to love industrial music, what really puts this thing over the edge is the steadiness of the hand that drafted it. There is order and hierarchy to the way information is presented and how it's shown to you. Certain characters in the story speak with different effects on the voices. A lot of those choices aren't arbitrary, or just for the sake of the noise. For an album about basically losing your mind, it's surprisingly well reasoned for what it is. I got a snack. As you'll find going forward in the list, I am a huge sucker for dance music. So Remain in Light is one of the funkiest albums ever, and there's something about this record that just makes you wanna move, dude. Side A of this thing is maybe the strongest 4-track run in the history of music. And then the second side, while a little bit less strong, is going for something totally different. It really feels like it meets your energy. Like it starts out with a really complex and strange groove that it takes a bit to get into, and then it lets you live there for a while, and then it keeps topping itself on the front side. And then by the time you've basically worn yourself out from shaking your ass too hard, it decrescendos from 5 through 7 into track 8, where it feels like you're wallowing at the bottom of the ocean. It starts out in such a fun place and it ends in such a scary place. And this is the album too where David Byrne was like, I had writer's block the whole time. Like, how the fuck we heard the same thing, didn't we? Experimental, weird, fun, funky, and honestly, I'll also throw a bone to Fila's riff. Would have been fine to put on the record, which is the only time in history I will ever say that. I will never again say, this could have been longer. That will never happen. Never, not once, no.
Now I'm darker than the deepest sea.
Speaking speaking of not longer, surprising nobody, I like sad white people music. So picture me again in that room, same shirt, same shorts, same maybe underwear. It's finals week, which didn't come up last time, but is relevant to this time. It's 2 in the morning. You have a final at 7 a.m. Tomorrow's gonna suck regardless. Might as well listen to something. And so stupidly, you click on this album because you think the cover is funny. This album is not funny. Like, imagine if that downward emotional trajectory of Remain in Light just kind of continued until you fall so far that you edge warp back up and you're just sitting there and you're like... This is the saddest... It's so sad, dude. It's literally just a guy and his guitar. There's like a piano sample on one track, and that's it. It's produced like shit. It's 28 minutes, but that's more than enough because by track 5, I was already leaking. The lyrical stylings are not super poetic. They're not clever. They're not pretty. Even the similes on tracks like Parasite are pretty simple. There's something about how plaintively they're all relayed, and you can tell that this man is just so fucking angry, doing his best to maintain that he is the problem because he must be. The world works fine without him. You can talk about breakups and people dying and shit all you want, but the stuff that really keeps me up at night is the fact that even when you're not in crisis, when everything is more or less fine, you still feel like the world is cosmically letting you down. This album understands that. Is this enough to convince you that this album had an effect on me? The fact that I'm just reduced to link noises? I don't remember if this album was one of the ones I listened to last year or not. I guess I could check, but that would require research, and that sounds boring. Either way, though, I had it at like a 70 out of 100 for the longest time, and then eventually, it just clicked. This album is the defining shoegaze record for a reason. Some of the most aggressively produced music I've ever heard, but underneath all of the layers of growling, clipping, breaking, is very standard and catchy pop songs. This album's branding is pretty much perfect. Not only because the album cover looks exactly like how the record sounds, but also it's like My Bloody Valentine is actively trying to boil music, like in a chem lab, to reduce it down to its core elements. And the one that winds up front and center, if you're able to sift through the resulting miasma that's created, is this core, beautiful and pure exploration of different kinds of love. Like, for example, the track Blown a Wish sounds like cooing in a baby. The track I Only Said's guitar riff sounds like a heart crying. The track Comin' Alone sounds like getting high as fuck with the girl of your dreams. And there's plenty more examples. The perspective of the love changes, but it's very clear that what's being expressed at the heart of these tracks is emotion. It's hard to fully explain that. Okay, imagine this. You're at Chipotle. You can pretty much order anything at Chipotle and it will taste like Chipotle. You know what I mean? There's no like weird thing in the middle that's like, why the fuck do they have that? Chipotle plays it in the fucking pocket, alright? And underneath it all, what really makes Chipotle work is the fact that they care about... I don't know what it is they care about, but it's there. It's fucking there. Now just imagine instead of cultural appropriation, the beauty that is love, and then you have this album.
Driving in your car, I never want to go home.
I still like Gin Blossoms, but the Smiths are on another level, man. Fuck. And while I have the generally held opinion about Morrissey, I can't deny that he has written some of the best not incel music ever written. This is a really hard record to fault, man. I love Jangle Pop, man. I love Jangle Pop. It's just so fun. And the lead singer, for whatever reason, is always suicidal. That is my favorite kind of lead singer. Provided they, don't. It's 10 incredibly fun and bouncy cuts that all take themselves a different amount of seriously. Even if the debut peaks higher than this one, this album is one of the most consistent things that's really come out ever. Every single track is a hater. The only thing holding this record back from a perfect 100 is the fact that it reiterates a couple of points it made better on other tracks on the later ones, but that might be my fault for putting weight on anything Morrissey says. This year I'll almost certainly be finishing out the rest of their discography. I love it, man. I love it, man.
Then it's the memory of our betters.
If If you don't know what LCD sound system is, it's basically club music for shut-in losers. That's my shit. This band is weird because a lot of their songs, you start them and you're like, what the fuck is this? This sounds like a demo. And then by the end, you're like, yeah, but it was fire. I don't know how they do it. The beats sound unfinished. James Murphy sounds like he doesn't know where the fuck he is half the time. And the songs are usually like 7 minutes long, which for a pop track is... But somehow it's just a fucking party front to back. Even the dumber cuts I forgive in totality because the beats are fire and again have that sort of malaise of sucking, so being kind of weird is part of the aesthetic. This is a band where if you're not into it, I get it. But yeah, if you dance like a Muppet, never go outside and hate yourself, you'll probably love this. Ooh, baby. This shit fucking rocks. This is my favorite album of the year. That's hardly a hot take, but I just still can't believe how fucking good this shit is. Listening to the highest rated albums of all time, and this dropped while I was looking at it. Here I was growing up like, the music from the 70s and 80s is where it's at, man. And then they just fucking dropped the album I've been wishing existed since I was fucking 6 in the year of our Lord 2024. How did anybody manage to make an album that is the pop rock sound that I grew up with and was ashamed to like so much, and turn it into something that really feels like art? It's beautiful. It's dense. There are themes. There are concepts. There are ambitious tracks lyrically and sonically. And again, underneath all that mastery is an album that even somebody who isn't up their own ass about music would get a lot out of. It's fucking phenomenal. This is one of those albums where pretty much any track could have been the single and I would have bought it. Granted, I think Image is the clearest example of a perfect song maybe ever recorded. The intermissions are also really fun, same with resulting tracks like Fear Sex. Like, the compulsion to shake your ass is so strong that she can lead you to the ends of the earth and you are hopeless but to follow. Such a fucking powerhouse of a band. Easily the most exciting project working today. I cannot wait for more Mag Bay. I can't gush about this thing enough. I'm so fucking blown away by it. It's... Alright, bitches, time for the top 5. All perfect scores. This is going to be interesting because if you've seen Family Feud Battle, you already know most of these. These are albums that I don't have problems with. Or if I do have problems with them, I don't care, basically. People have well isolated the defining trip-hop album, I think. This is one of the few albums I can think of where on first listen I was sure it was 100. This really feels like trip-hop 101. It's kind of like Illmatic where you listen to that once and you're like, oh, okay, so that's what this shit is all about. No fanciness, no big concept. This is what bare bones peak sounds like. I know it's a trip-hop album, and I know the lead singer has a very pretty voice, but in the grand scheme of music in general, 3 of my top 5 beats of all time are on this album. I listened to this for the first time in the last half of October. I've heard nothing else this band has done ever, really. But I still got a notification from my phone saying that in October I was in like the top 0.1% of Portishead listeners. Like, I was fucking addicted to these beats. The bass on Pedestal is unmatched. The production is so out there and steady at the same time. Just an incredible crop of tracks that are cold and mysterious, but also so suave. And the closer ripping off the band-aid, just going full jazz. Oh yeah, that's my shit. Whew. Ooh, it's a 10. There's 2 albums on this list that are on this wall, and this is the other one. Purple Rain, dude. Shit. It's just 9 incredible cuts. Every single one of them rattles the foundation of your body. Groovy, danceable, weird and experimental too, and surprisingly soulful for what's ultimately one of the most eclectic dance parties ever put to a record. The arrangements of these tracks are a bit more sparse than I feel like you would think they would be. They're not all trying to smother you. It's a film soundtrack, so perhaps that makes sense. They take their time to build anticipation, but man, you're working with Prince. You're making some of the most insane music ever. He only does it in sparing amounts, but pretty much every track on this record crescendos into just squealing. Even the tracks that I wasn't crazy about on first listen, only thought they were really good, it climbed the ladder to incredible status, as I appreciated them more as individual pieces. There's almost too much going on to keep track of all at once. If you just go to it listening casually like you would any other dance record, it might just lose you. It's so full of ideas. But each of these tracks individually kicks so much ass that as a full package, this is an absolutely indispensable listen. Even if it's only my second favorite album that came out this millennium, I should think it's the best. At least that I've heard. I've still got some catching up to do. But man, it's as good as they say. This album really does everything. It's pop music, it's jazz music, it's rock music, it's prog, and the last couple of tracks are post-rock. Isaac Wood's voice too is like, he's a poet, man. So weird and hard to get into, but it's because it's about the words. It's so weird to think that like in the grand canon of music, the tentpole albums are stuck in their times. Because like I think about Pink Floyd, a lot of the references they throw into their music being very British and 70s. And so it's so fun to think of an album kind of holding the same level of regard. It has references to like Warhammer 40k in it. You know what I mean? It's so surreal to hear stuff that I grew up with in an album that I think is sophisticated. It starts out in this bright, happy place and then rapidly falls into a pit of despair. And then the album is split in half by this interlude track with its huge gaps of silence and space, and might even be a highlight off the record. And then of course the last three, which are taking those concepts and turn them into gratifying post-rock. Super long tracks that build into something huge, and despite having so many shining moments, at the end of Basketball Shoes, dude, I get shivers just thinking about it. I couldn't pick a weak link. We're living through history, folks. This album is a horror movie you can listen to. Every single track on this thing somehow manages to evoke the feeling of either you're chasing something or you are actively being chased. And as it turns out, lyrically, it wound up being an autobiography. The lead singer of this band is a turbo piece of shit, and fuck him into the earth. Like, dude, fuck him, man. And also, for the rest of Daughters, fuck your hiatus. You done. It's over. Even though this album fucking blew my mind. And beyond just having an incredible sound, it's some of the most transportive energy I've heard in an album ever. It feels like it's fucking with you, which is what really gets me. It's so weird to describe it, but like, it feels like it knows that it's gonna tire you out. There are moments on this album I did not enjoy sitting through, if that makes sense. Like, the second track feels like it should be 3 minutes, but it's 5 minutes. It's not bad, but you also understand that at the fucking breakneck pace it sets, 3 minutes of headbanging is about as much as you can handle, and it feels like the song tries to resolve and then just keeps pushing. There are other moments where like the music will cut out and then come back, but it'll come back on an offbeat. So in order to keep headbanging in time, you have to do a half step in your head, and that instantly gives you a huge headache. But it gives you time to recover after that with a slower song coming up next. It's stuff like that where it feels like this album is intentionally trying to give you a headache. They just kind of somehow knew how the album would fuck with you, and there's something incredible about that. This album is a cinematic experience, and it will probably scare the shit out of you. So if you're fine with heavy, punishing music written by a total fucking lunatic, you'll probably enjoy it. But if you're not completely curious, I would stay away. And now for number one. Oh boy, what's it gonna be? God only knows. I hope you're putting in effects to make this look cool. I go back and forth on whether or not I hate this cover. I've decided I hate it, so enjoy the dog instead. This is the other band that played in the car with my dad a lot. We listened to Lithium on the drive home from Cub Scouts pretty much every Tuesday. But it'd been since high school that I heard side B, so I gave another listen, and yeah, it's peak. It's fucking awesome. This band is not overrated. They're just not. I was surprised how much of a pop lean a lot of these tracks have, especially on the first half. But the whole thing as a complete package manages to keep gear grinding guitars feeling fresh and new and creative and interesting. I really thought this album was gonna suffer from like, the tracks kind of sound the same, but they don't. And I can't think of a better vocalist to put over a sound like this than somebody whose voice is as distorted as the guitars. Kurt is fucking unbelievable. The drums are nutty, and the bass, dude. There are some bass lines on this record I never gave credit to that are fucking sexy. Man, oh man. I'll say it, Kurt's guitar tone is second to none. The growl on that motherfucker, it really sounds like he's strumming a tiger. Even Endless Nameless, like on a weird day, if I listen to this album, I'll be like, yeah, this is nice. And then Endless Nameless comes on and I'm like, yo, real shit. There's just such a pulse-pounding, fun energy to this thing. Plus the production. Holy shit. Like, might be in the same conversation as OK Computer. Why they switch producers for In Utero, I will never know. It's chaotic, it's iconic, it's catchy, and it totally belongs here. Hey, camera died and it's still plugged in, that was weird. And there's the list. I think I'm starting to get loopy because there's not enough ventilation in here. I've been in this room talking for like 3 hours. It just kind of feels shitty that not as much hip-hop as I would have liked to see. It's not like I didn't listen to any. There's plenty of hip-hop albums that I gave like 85s to. There isn't as much representation as I was hoping there would be on a list like this. You know what? You can fill the space. Give me some recommendations. You guys recommended some good shit last year. Like the Doom Rex, the Illmatic. Like that opened the fucking world for me. So anything a bit more out there you think I would like, let me know. I'll listen to it maybe. Only if your taste doesn't suck. Yeah, we're done here.
They're coming for me. I must make my escape.